Chapter 6, Violin 10.1, June 4th, 1723 AD. His love had bid him walk until he were to come upon a tree that reminded him of her. So he'd walked and walked until he'd found it, a young sapling with its arms outstretched up toward him. His love had bid him wait by that tree that reminded him of her, so there he waited. Over the centuries the tree had grown around him, encasing all but a small spot on the sharp of his right shoulder, but given his gray complexion, even this small exposed part of the giant was as one with the tree. He waited, listening for the sound of her voice, awaiting the return of his love. 4 days' journey away, Elizabeth Squire was out with her sisters picking flowers in a meadow and enjoying the summer. As it had been for all of the vessels of Lyelin, she had lived a life of privilege and comfort, denied nothing within reason, and she was happy. She was the prettiest of her sisters, and she had her very own mirror in her room to prove it. Their household was never without warmth, even on the coldest of nights, and their crops never failed. The success of their farmland led to the acquisition of more until they were an enterprising brand in the surrounding communities. They lived in the New World, America, and they were prosperous. Their father was well liked by most because of his strong ethics and entrepreneurial yet philanthropic demonstrations. He even paid his slaves a fair wage for their labor. This earned him respect by many, but loathing eyes also turned his way as a consequence. There were many white men who altogether disavowed their kinship to black men or of any they perceived as sufficiently different, and many of them were dangerous, willing to act on their beliefs when they feel they are affronted. There is a name for such people. They are known as racist assholes. In 18th century America, they infest the population to such a degree that the practice of their hateful ways is commonplace and not hidden at all, but rather paraded like a badge of honor. Some would publicly decree that those of differing genetic features should be subjugated altogether, and do so loudly and without fear of humiliation. They would instead be oft met with applause from the misguided masses. Still, though plots of ill intent encircled them and their homestead, the daughters of Caleb Squire were happy. They shared their father's idyllic views and never thought to fear for their lives because of his kind ways. As Elizabeth moved to a new patch and knelt down, it happened. The change had started. She was 11 years old. As she laughed and played with her sisters, her voice carried over the breeze, traversed the miles and mountains between them, and fell on his ears, the crevices of which were filled in with the twisting innards of the tree that had overtaken him. It was her. He turned, the base of the tree twisting and snapping as he did, leaves bursting from its suddenly jolted, pivoting branches high above. He turned toward the sound of her voice, and he stepped out of his wooded prison and began walking toward her, bringing the centuries-old tree crashing down on top of him. The branches snapped as though they'd met an unbreakable stone as they came down atop his head, and bent where he would not. He walked unhindered toward her voice. He would have to cross a wide river and traverse many miles, but he would be there beside her inside of 4 days. Hemhut was almost never seen. He was a 10-foot-tall mass of gray with flat surfaces on the skin above his joints, such as on his knees and shoulders. He had no genitalia that was visible, no belly button or hair, and his ears were somewhat recessed into his head. He looked as though he'd been carved from stone, like the king in a life-size marble chess set, carved of flat gray stone and minus the crown. Otherwise, he looked fairly human. That is to say, he was in the shape of a man. He would move through the masses, seldom seen despite his enormous size. He was known to walk through a crowd, all parts of which would be distracted by some other sight as he passed. Heads would turn at the last moment to just avoid catching sight of him, and he would disappear by the time they would turn back, having rounded a corner or become concealed by something else that masks his bulk, sometimes simply blending in with the background so well that he would be unseen even by eyes that were looking squarely at him, such as under cover of rain. So long as he did not deviate from Lyelin's instructions, he was invisible to most of the world. Once every few centuries an off-person would witness him in passing, but none of them would live longer than a few minutes, not one of them. No person had ever survived having seen him throughout the ages. Many would be so terrified at the sight of him that they would run headlong into their deaths attempting to flee him, backing over the edges of high walls, running face first into sharp protrusions and the like, and some he would kill in line with Lyelin's instructions. So the unseen giant remained invisible, such as it was designed by Lyelin. He sank beneath the waves under the cover of night, light from the stars above fading as he went deeper and farther. The sound of the sloshing of water filled his ears, yet he stayed trained on the soft wisps of her breath, never losing focus, and moved ever directly forward and toward her. She had told him what to expect, but that there was no cause for alarm, that he would arrive to save her before she would come to harm. He would find her vessel in distress, but shortly dispatch of the stressors. He needn't fear for her safety. He trusted her, so he did not hasten his journey as he otherwise might have, knowing she might be imperiled. She had told him that she would be all right, and he believed her when she said that she would be. If he were to deviate from the course laid out for him, that which she'd foretold, the future that they had sought and built together all this time could become undone. So he walked at the pace with which he always had as he walked on, gradually narrowing the gap between them, closer to his love with each step, but in no hurried fashion. Elizabeth went to bed that night complaining of a headache, and stating that she must be delirious from the pain because she was seeing things. She was starting to see through the eyes of those around her and her own at the same time, and she had trouble keeping her vision focused and her mind in her own head. The next morning, she would begin noticing the little skips in time she was seeing, and that, along with her new means of sight, made her flustered and confused. For the first day, she wasn't certain whether she was living in the present or a second ahead of herself in time, and she seemed clumsy, dropping things before she intended to and bumping into things, unsure of her place in time. Her sisters tried to help her to no avail, and she surprised them several times by reacting to seemingly spontaneous things or sudden occurrences just before they happened. The eldest, Gabriella, found it all fascinating, and went straight away to inform Master Squire of what was afoot. He dismissed her for the game he thought she was getting at and said he would see Elizabeth later, and he got back to his tabulations. Later that evening he returned home to a house full of overexcited girls, all of them swirling around him, all at once spinning tales of Elizabeth's wondrous new talents. Throughout the day it seemed Elizabeth had started to get a handle on things and was seemingly warming up to the new her. Her headache had gone that morning, and she was in bright spirits by the evening when her father finally gave her the time. He was astonished, stunned by what she demonstrated. When she predicted the acts of his other daughters, or claimed to see what they were seeing, he thought it all trickery, the fun his daughters had gotten to for the day. But when she accurately predicted his own spontaneity, even from out of sight, he was blown away. She told them that it was difficult for her to keep her mind from wandering, and that every time it did, she would begin seeing through the eyes of many, many other people all at once, which was very disorienting. So to keep her distracted, they kept the fun going into the twilight, asking her questions, having her prove herself by watching their actions when out of line of sight, and so on. She was having a great time of it, and loved that it kept her in the here and now, repeatedly drawing back her mind when it had begun to set adrift, bringing her back to the fun-filled night with her family. They went on until after the little ones had all drifted off and been sent to bed. After a full evening's more oil had burnt down to nothing and nearly half more of a second, and on until Gabriella, who had assumed the role of her mother in part after she'd passed, especially with regard to tending the children, sent them to bed. Elizabeth presumed that she was going to have a hard time of it, but instead of struggling against her wakefulness, found herself instead fast asleep that night, exhausted from the long day and late night. 2 days of walking left between them, Hemhut glided out of the water and up onto the land the following morning. Some fishermen not 20 feet from him, readying their gear and craft, never saw him as he strode through. By the time the fishermen cast their gaze in his direction, Hemhut was 40 feet up a sheer cliff face, gently pulling his mass up, showing little effort as though he were nearly weightless, and the fishermen never chanced to look up. The veritably invisible giant reached the top in little time and continued his forward progression from there, ever forward, moving toward the sweet sound of his love. He could hear the neighbors plotting to accost the family and threaten the father, kill him if they have to. He wanted to bolt into a run and reach her sooner, but he did as he was asked, and he only walked at the speed with which he normally walked. He couldn't wait to get there. She had told him that when he and she were to next be reunited, he would come upon her whilst in the grip of a hostile man and boys that mean her harm. And she had told him that he must appear no sooner than expected, which frustrated him, But then she had told him also that he may do with this hostile man as he wished, so long as he died, and that pleased him. He intended to use it as a demonstration of his affection for her. Hemhut would crush him, as he would any who would dare lay a hand on his love. He would show her how much he loved her by way of the utter annihilation of he who would harm her. He walked and walked, her voice all the more clear and ever closer with every moment. The eldest of its forefathers had been born, but the United States was not yet even a dream, and would not be for half a century more to come. It was the era of colonial America. Life was hard for so many, but the Squires were fortunate. They had been lucky in so many respects not afforded to so many others, so much so that one might say that they were simply and truly blessed. They were so blessed, in fact, that they saw no problem with sharing their wealth, even with the coloreds in the slave quarters. This didn't sit well with the family of struggling white racist ne'er-do-wells who lived in one of the neighboring communities. They were devout fundamentalist Christians who believed that God favored the white man because of some grievous misinterpretation of the Bible, and they were broke. They worked a party of like-minded fools into a frenzy that night, hooting and wailing in their misguided, self-righteous ways, and devised a plan to get them what they deserve come tomorrow. All the while, the main objective of the chief conspirator was to get at their funds and the deeds for their properties. It was a robbery disguised as the righteous upheaval of someone who they had determined went against the word of God, because he'd been providing provisions for his workers beyond that required by law. Gus Adams, patriarch of the racist family, had rallied up 12 of their neighbors, and including the able-bodied members of their own family, that meant that he was going to march 19 people straight to their graves tomorrow night. For he would arrive just in time to be greeted by the giant, whose love had given him free rein to kill them as he pleased, and he would not be in a very pleasant mood. But it just goes to show that sometimes behaving in certain ways gets you curled up into a little ball and shoved down your youngest son's throat so suddenly that you wind up recoiling and unfurling from your collapsed, balled-up state while lodged in the poor boy's lung cavity, effectively tearing him in half right in front of his own mother and brothers before you even realize you're dead. Sometimes those kinds of things just happen to racist assholes like Gus Adams. Hannah Dunn 1, May 15, 1995 AD. Hannah Dunn, with her gorgeous locks of flowing red hair, was celebrating her 16th birthday. It was only May, but the pool was already warm, warmer than she would have liked for her partygoers, but not yet the veritable sauna it would become in a month or so. One serious drawback to living in Phoenix, Arizona was the heat. The incessant battering of sunlight was unbearably relentless, often even in the early days of summer. Extended exposure could spell a fairly quick death for the maladapted. 12 of her friends and classmates had shown up. Her parents' best friends had also come and brought their kid, but he was only 3. Everyone seemed to be having a good time, so thus far the party was a success. Hannah was ready to swim. She had her bathing suit on under her clothes. She loved to swim, but she was considered one of the prettiest girls in school, so when she saw the boobs on Sandy McCall when she came out in her bikini, she thought better of it. Better to leave something to the imagination and not let the boys at the party draw comparisons that might lower her status as most desirable or raise opinions of Sandy McBoobs any more than need be. So she watched and drank lemonade instead, chatting up her friends with typical teenage drabble, playing with her flows of red hair every chance she got. None of the boys here really caught her eye, but she never let off her very well-rehearsed and practiced methods of catching theirs. She was the pretty one, the appealing one, and so she must remain. So she would tease a twirl of her hair here and there, randomly bite her lip from time to time, and thrust a hip hither and thither when able, among other girly things. It was part of who she was. She wasn't really a flirt. She was modest if truth be told. She just had it, knew she had it, and she showed it off, but with tasteful discretion. She wasn't one of those hoochie mamas that parades around with her ass hanging out, but might as well have been with all the heads she turned. She had a pretty face, a fit, petite body, but it was really all about the hair for her. That was what got people's attention, the iconic movie star hair she rocked. That, and of course famously, her ass. The smell of hot dogs and burgers wafting from the barbecue filled the air, the sound of sizzling drowned out by the radio and the noise of kids. It wasn't really even that hot out. It was, as of yet, one of her better birthday parties. She had declined the suggestion of gussing the occasion up for the traditional Sweet 16, stating that the idea of every girl having to celebrate their 16th birthday in an overly feminine fashion did not vibe with the times. So, as a teen mind-driven political statement, it was just a 16th birthday party with no stereotypical over-the-top caricatures of femininity involved. It was surprising to most that the feminine pretty girl wouldn't want to share in the tradition, pointless as it may be, of being heralded as a princess for the day, as was practiced so often during the time period. She said that she felt the tradition made some girls who were simply not effeminate uneasy. It's fine for the princesses of the world, but what about everyone else? Not every girl is sweet at 16, but the tradition of the Sweet 16 birthday makes them feel like they should not be who they are, and instead be a princess even when they don't feel like one. She wanted to be known as the pretty girl, yes, but she also wanted to be known for her mind. The Sweet 16 thing was fairly disingenuous. It wasn't like she was about to go out and gather signatures or picket in front of the White House. But there weren't so many opportunities to take a stand, which wasn't simply an echo of current public outcry. She saw a thing, and she took what she could get when she could get it. So there would be no Sweet 16 for her. No one took the time to call her on her bullshit save one. There has always got to be one. Some people just live to argue. A junior, Philip Goldman, in her sophomore English class spoke up a week prior and said that she was full of crap, and even at one point flat out said, "Hannah, you don't have to pretend like you have something to say when you don't," which caught her off guard, but then he sent her over a cliff when he added, "Besides, nobody hears what you say anyway, they're all too busy looking at your ass." She ripped him a new one as best she could, tore him down in front of the whole class, ending with, "At least I've got something worth looking at. Nobody bats an eye at you." It was quite a display, but the junior never apologized, never budged. He wasn't invited to the party, of course, and she'd let go of it, but one of her friends just had to keep it going. No less than 6 times during the party, though they knew very well what she'd said, her friends teased her while conversing and said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't listening to you, I was looking at your ass." Or, "Huh? What was that? Nice ass, by the way," and so on. So there it was, the running gag. Hannah would now hear from her friends that she had a nice ass every day for years to come. It had already gotten old, it would only get older still. She did like the nickname it got her, though. Fine Ass Hannah Dunn. That's not the worst nickname one could have. Besides, she couldn't disagree with them. She was shapely. When it was announced that it was time to bring out the birthday cake, everybody gathered round on the back patio, water dripping all over the cement from the circle of teens in wet bathing suits. The birthday cake said simply, "Happy 16th birthday, Hannah." Nothing about Sweet 16. Several of the birthday cards she'd received said Sweet 16 somewhere in their text, but she didn't pay it any mind. Then it came time to open presents. She was a fledgling painter and a writer, and nearly all of her birthday gifts were art supplies, mostly acrylic paints, canvases, and multimedia paper pads of varying size and quality. She got some new clothes and cash totaling $220, the $160 her grandfather had sent by mail, plus 2 20s and 2 10s that had been enclosed in birthday cards from her friends. The 3-year-old, the son of her parents' friends, had been waiting patiently, eagerly holding the gift he'd picked for her in his little hands. He was very proud of it, and thought that she would like it most of all, more than any of her other gifts, and he asked his mom to translate to Hannah for him that he would prefer for her to open the gift from him last. He was very cute, dressed to look quite dapper once he dried from swim time, hair very neat. It made his speech impediment seem all the more endearing. Hannah, ever the one to entertain a child's simplistic wishes, feigned a search for more presents after she knowingly opened all of the others. She pretended to look under the table, pulling up the tablecloth that draped over the edge, saying, "Gee, I thought I saw one more present here. I guess that must be all of them." The little boy was practically dancing in place from nervous delight and anticipation, and burst out with one of the few words he could say very clearly, "Me, me, me," as he jumped up and down feverishly, careful not to drop her present. Hannah looked at him, faking surprise, and brushed her hair behind her ears as she leaned toward him with a witty smile and said, "Oh, that's right. I hear you have a very special gift for me, is that right?" "Yes," he exclaimed, another of his good words, on the verge of losing it from the excitement. He ran up and handed it to her proudly and said, "Heo." She turned it over and over in her hands a moment, allowing the anticipation to build a bit more. Then she carefully opened the wrapping. It was a toy, a magic 8-ball. She was ready to say, "I love it, thank you," but before she could say anything, the little boy had grabbed it from out of her lap. See? He said, turning it over and over. Akeston, see? Oh, I do see, Hannah said whimsically and in a sing-song tone. You ask it a question. See? He said, and he turned it to look through the viewing window. Hannah will die? And he flipped it over and back. Yes. Then again. Hannah will die? Another flip too quick for any words to have appeared in the window, and again. Yes. He kept repeating it over and over, and the smile crept from Hannah's face. Is he asking if I'm going to die? She asked the boy's mom, understandably more than a little disturbed by the boy's chanting. No, 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 his mom said with a wave of her hand and a knowing smile. He's saying Hannah will like. He asked it the same thing in the store. He's been playing with it non-stop until we wrapped it. You know he can't read, but he believes it answers him with a yes every time. That's all he's been asking over and over again. Hannah will like? This did not make Hannah feel any better, and she now pictured the little boy chanting, Hannah will die, yes, as he'd gone about his day before the party, and it sent a chill down her spine. Like a sudden change in the wind, the little boy stopped his one-man show and briskly marched right back to Hannah, offering it back to her from his little outstretched hand. Heo, see? She didn't ask it any questions aloud. She just remembered the boy's question as it had sounded to her, and watched as the purple-dyed fluid slowly gave way to reveal the random response of the 8-ball. The purple-tinted white-face type lettering appeared through the film. Hannah felt another deeper chill fall down her spine when she silently read its reply. It is certain.